Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me this afternoon, we have Tim Francis, Enterprise Cyber-related Travelers, and we're here to discuss the top cyber-related business concerns. Tim, it is great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks, and let's start overall here with the biggest trends that you're seeing in 2024 in terms of the cyber landscape.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me. Happy to be with you and your audience. I think the trend that we're seeing is really just the magnitude of cyber as a general threat and how important that is to companies. We do every year what we call our Travelers Business Risk Index, and cyber concern is number one. Again, it's been number one 4 out of the last 6 years. That's above general broad economic uncertainty. It's above as companies are thinking about healthcare costs for employees, right? So that just speaks to the magnitude of cyber as a risk that's topical with, our customers and generally across the economy.
Tim, it's interesting. I was looking at the survey here and current threats to businesses. It says that nearly half of companies you surveyed thought their companies weren't big enough or complex enough. And that really stuck out to me because that's clearly subjective. So how do you form that baseline? How are you informing your clients? Because clearly it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but that number that nearly half don't think they're big enough or complex enough, that really raised, a red flag in my head.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that concern because we do hear that a lot. And I think that's, formed from the headlines, right? And organizations will read, threats from, national security actors and think about it in that context, which happens and is right to be thinking about some of those concerns. But what we find more often than not in a lot of the cases where the cyber events are essentially criminal organizations that are trying to monetize, and think about ransomware and social engineering fraud and those types of things, the threat actors really aren't necessarily targeting companies based on size or complexity. They're actually looking out and scanning and seeing vulnerabilities, and then they're exploiting the vulnerabilities. And oftentimes, they may not even know who the victim is until that entity is already victimized, right? They've entered the network, and then they've established some baseline of understanding who this risk is. Then they're going to be able to formulate the attack, set a ransom demand, etc., based on that entity. But they're already in at that point. You're already a victim, whether you were targeted or not.
Yeah, because my first thought was, okay, what if you're a smaller law firm or a smaller school or a smaller doctor's offices? We know law firms because of the data that they have access to, schools, education, of course, children's data. That was the first thing that came to my mind because they are typically smaller scale than you would think, a publicly traded Fortune 500 company. What would you say is the biggest threat in the landscape right now? Is it still ransomware?
Yeah, ransomware, there's multitude of threats. It's social engineering fraud. It's what we call business email compromise. But ransomware, and again, in our survey, that's really increased in the ecosystem. It's gone from a number 9 threat to a number 3 threat in terms of what people are concerned about. But it's probably the thing that is the most dramatic in terms of the financial impact, not just the payment of the ransom. In fact, many times the ransom isn't always paid, but the disruption to the organization. You mentioned particularly small law firms, small healthcare companies, right? The smaller you are, not only you might lack the resiliency to prevent the attack, but you lack the resiliency to come out of the attack, right? And so with ransomware in particular, your system may be taken offline. And if you're down for hours, let alone days or potentially longer, that's a huge potential impact financially into your reputational survivability of these events, frankly.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because the survey said almost 60% of respondents thought it's not a matter of if, it's when.
That's right.
On the other side of that, I was surprised the number was actually that low. So when you think about, participants thinking about it's not a matter of if, but when, how are you working with organizations to help them mitigate, respond, and move on from these types of events?
So, it's interesting, right? We see that. I agree with you, right? Everybody should be concerned and everybody should be thinking about these events certainly can happen to me and very well might. And so we also see that a lot of those responders who are concerned and think that they're going to have an event really haven't done even some of the basic steps. So things like multi-factor authentication across their networks, things like endpoint detection and response, EDR, Even having an incident response plan, right? So you think an event's going to happen to you, and yet you've done nothing to try to prepare for, well, what if it does happen? And so we work with our customers to make sure they understand where they can shore up vulnerabilities that they might have, put together incident response plans if they don't have them, and kind of really work with them on a plan for their organization.
Tim, let's talk about cyber insurance for a moment here. 3 in 10 survey participants have cyber insurance. If I understand it correctly, your commercial insurance doesn't typically cover cyber attacks. So how should they go about thinking of acquiring cyber insurance? How do you place a value on that? Because again, it's not a one size fits all solution. There's different types of businesses and different types of sizes of businesses.
That's right. It's not a one size fits all solution. And really for cyber insurance, any size company can find a cyber insurance product that suits their needs, right? And so what a Fortune 100 company buys will be different than that small law firm, but yet coverage is available and important. I think the point that I would stress, and probably different than and how people think about most insurance products, right? You think about most insurance products, it's the thing you use when you know, unfortunately have an event that takes place. And cyber insurance also provides that similar financial backstop. But if you think about, again, that small law firm or whatever it might be, where you don't necessarily have cybersecurity personnel on staff, you might have IT people that are running the systems to try to run the company, but they're not living cybersecurity issues every day. With cyber insurance, if you have an event, you not only have the financial backstop, right, to pay and reimburse for those costs, but you have immediate access 24/7 to a group of people that can really respond. So it's really, you know, with other insurance where you might call 911 if your building's on fire or you've been in an accident, the cyber insurer is really acting as the first responder. They're bringing together the incident response companies, what we would call a breach coach in our world, to really walk you through these events, pay a ransom or negotiate a ransom if necessary. And then you get into the financial backstop. So it's all of that plus that first response component.
Yeah, the role of the breach coach is certainly very interesting. And one last question here, Tim. We know with home insurance, as an example, you have an appraisal. There's somewhat of a tangible number to put on that, right? Reputation, and it's hard to put a number on. Trying to, look into the future and determine what kind of breach or incident you may have. On a high level, how do you assign a monetary value to that?
Sure. And again, there's a sliding scale. It's not a one size fits all. So you're looking at what industry is the organization in, what is their revenue, right? If they're going to suffer an event, how long will they be down for potentially based on their resiliency, and what will that financial impact be? We're also running scans on our customers' network. We want to see where their systems may be reaching out and being interacting with threat actors, or if they have vulnerabilities on their system. So we're helping them patch those vulnerabilities, but we're also using that in our determination of, well, what is the right appropriate coverage for that organization, and adjusting our pricing and to their needs.
All right. Appreciate the insight, Tim. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you.